I think one of the most common mistakes I see is people making things more complicated than they need to be. So, we should write for clear communication, not to show how smart we are. Or, sometimes people just understand the material so well themselves, too, that they don't realize they're making it complicated for their readers. So, I think that using short sentences, short paragraphs, avoiding jargon is really important. That's an easy trap to fall into because you know your industry. And if you're writing for other people in your industry, it may be fine to use those shortcuts, those abbreviations that, every workplace or industry has that nobody else understands. For internal communication, that's fine. But if you're writing, something for a customer or something for, a web article or something like that, it's make sure you take out all that jargon that's going to make it hard for your reader to understand what you're talking about.
Hmm.
The other thing people sometimes could do better is to make sure the subject of the sentence is at the beginning. Studies have shown that reading comprehension is improved when you use just a simple sentence structure. So, the subject at the beginning, our podcast is about writing, not something like when you want to write, but I mean,
Right.
sometimes people will start with what is really a subordinate clause, something that should come. It can grammatically go at the beginning, but if it's just adding information to the main point, move it to the end so that you get to the main point of that sentence first.
Yeah, I think people like fluff because it feels almost jarring sometimes to get straight to the point right away. Like I am definitely guilty of starting almost every email with like hope all is well, and it's like I'm addicted to not being able to just go straight to the point because I feel like, and maybe this is like a whole nother topic, but I feel sort of like it's a bit jarring to get straight to the point. But you're saying no, 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 like people want that in email.
Well, I think an email is also different from an article. Like, we don't have to throw out all the social niceties. Like, yes, there's a wordiness that comes into play when, an email is almost a form of conversation. So I think it's okay to start out with hope you're well or hope you had a good weekend or, did that dinner you told me about last night, meet was it all that you hoped it would be?
Yeah.
Like we don't need to be so abrupt and clear, in email that we avoid all the social niceties. But I was thinking more of, an article that you were writing
Right.
or
Something
or
you're going to
a
post for
meeting
work.
report or notes from a meeting or something like that.
Right. I do find it's interesting because my first job, I was the person who had to take the notes at the board meetings and then I would have to send them to everybody. And I got, mind you, I was like 22. It's my first job. And somebody did write me back and they said, this is way too long. Like, I want you to start sending this in bullet points. And it was kind of alarming because I was like, oh, well, I'm taking the notes. I better write everything down because they're going to need to know everything. And one of the board members wrote me and he was like, no, stop doing that. Which I thought was fascinating just because, what about communication styles? Like, is it really helpful? Maybe not for work, for like reports, but when you are writing an email to your boss or your colleague or your client, like, is it important to ask people first, like what communication style they prefer? Because some people might like, somebody might have appreciated that I wrote those board meeting notes in like, story or paragraph form.
Right. The way I do it is I usually start out pretty formal, and then I quickly take my cues from how the other person is writing. So, I have two people I worked with in the past, and one was, sort of a 60-year-old senior executive at a company, and the other was someone about my age. And I would write completely differently when I was writing to each of them. And, I started out the same, but then I quickly took my cues. And so,
Yeah.
I would use emoji in the email to my, colleague that's my age, but I would never in a million years use an emoji to the 60-year-old executive. So,
Right.
and I would start out, at a more formal level, and you can always dial it back,
Yeah.
but it's yeah.
It's kind of like dressing for an interview. It's like you might as well start more formal and then, if everybody in the office wears, jeans and hoodies all day, okay, fine, but maybe not while you're interviewing. Kind of, you always start more formal.
Right. And sometimes you can get a cue from corporate communications. There are some companies that have very informal public facing collateral,
Yeah.
so you would imagine that it's more acceptable at that company to start out a little more informally.
Mm-hmm. So, in addition to email, we also have messaging tools like Slack and text and all the other things. So it feels like we can communicate all the time, and I think people probably are communicating all the times. What are the pros and cons of that?
Mm. Yeah, I mean, it can be overwhelming. I have found, I'm on some Slack channels and now I'm just checking more things. It hasn't
Yeah.
saved me any time at all. Um, I use email for things where I need to save my own trail
Hmm.
of the conversation, which is, most of the time, except for quick questions or chats. I think Slack and texting are great for super quick questions when you need to reach someone, texting when you need to reach someone urgently, that's usually the best way. I try to keep most things in email just because I find the chains of conversation easier to follow there.
Right.
But I mean, different people are going to prefer different things. I know someone who uses almost exclusively Facebook Messenger and thinks that's the best way
Oh,
to do
wow.
everything. So
Yeah.